personal life to self-help support field?
It was really an accident where I was simply putting together a list of community support groups near our hospital. When I arrived there, the doctors and the clinicians could only name one group, Alcoholics Anonymous, which is the greatest and the oldest of the groups, and they didn't know about others. So I started looking, and I found support groups in the area that could be helpful to depression and to also parents of children with learning disabilities and many others. It came to a list of 50 groups just in the immediate area of the hospital in northern New Jersey that I started working as a community consultant. And but I also found people that, for instance, clergy would tell me about someone in their parish who is interested in starting a group, and you should check with her to see if she did start a breast cancer support group. And I would call and she would say, I always wanted to start one. I work with women with breast cancer, but often we don't have the opportunity to share with other women. And and we met with the Cancer Society at that time, and they were not very supportive. They said, no, you need a psychiatrist or a psychiatric social worker to run this group. And as we left the office, the woman Eleanor, who was a veteran volunteer, said, can't we have our own group? Don't they realize what they are doing, that if you have a psychiatrist or a social worker there, that they are saying you not only have a problem with breast cancer, but you have maybe a problem with thinking in your head. And it would be much better if we simply share our stories and our concerns. And so just in that 1 year that I was looking for the groups, I found that we were very rich in those types of resources. And those types of people, when I went to case reviews, this is when the clinicians would get together, and they would talk about a particular case, that this woman who was very depressed because she was having problems of infertility, and wanted to have, was exploring artificial insemination, and I suggested that they refer to the local group that was available. And when I went to the next case conference, the therapist said, hey, you robbed me of a patient. She called the woman on the phone, and the woman on the phone had gone through the same procedure. And she said to me, my depression lifted like a cloud. In terms, I finally found out that I'm not alone, and that there are others who have gone through this.
So, if I understand correctly, there were a lot of self-help groups or support groups in the community.
Yes.
But how this field of self-help groups, or even the work you started, self-help support, was viewed by the professionals back then?
It wasn't really understood. It was, and they would joke about it. You know, it said, oh, it's the blind leading the blind. And then the next year, I found one blind man came to me who said, hey, we have our group for people who are born blind. But what we really need is people keep coming to our group who late in life are losing their sight. And they are afraid to go even outside for fear of falling or being basically unable to negotiate the streets safely. And so he said, we really need a group for this. So I said, would you be willing to help? And so we hired him and 2 people who were blind to help start new groups, but it would be just for people in their older years, or sometimes there were students, even young college students, you know, who had an accident and were blinded, and they would join the group also. And it was amazing in terms of helping one another. They all have, I think what happens with the groups, they all have one thing in common, and that is they are dealing with change that they want in their life or that they're going through, and it's a difficult change. And so I'm not a clinician, but I often think back to when does everyone go through the most change? And I think it's in adolescence. And what do we do at that time when we're going through such physical and emotional change is we look to our peers as support, and teenagers just coming together. So it's a natural thing to do that we follow that in adolescence, but we need to follow it also in the rest of our lives. That it can be extremely helpful. So I basically said, this is very good when we can identify these groups, and when all I have to do is show them that there is a national organization that will help them start a group. And they follow the directions of the national organization and have started, in New Jersey, we've started over 1,200 groups in 34 years. But, and some of them have grown to become national organizations. But it shows it shows the human spirit in terms of people telling their stories, and it can be simply like, in many of the groups, they simply say what their life was like before they came to the group, and how their life has changed. And often it'll be based on the stories of other people in the group that help them, guide them, suggest to them alternatives that they never knew they could follow. And, you know, that especially when you are feeling so despairing without any hope, the group gives hope to people. So it helps in so many ways, and we now have so much research showing that social support is so essential to good mental health, to the prevention of pathologies. I mean, I'm not a clinician. I look at the strengths of people, and they can simply be very strong when they come together, and it can be so rewarding, and people learn so much because they are teaching others in subtle ways. And so if you want to learn something twice, you basically teach it to someone else, and you affirm it in your own soul. And these groups address many of the issues that produce the loneliness that we face today.
So I was going to ask you afterwards about the powerful features of self-help groups, but because we already started this conversation, I heard you these last days at the conference giving emphasis on the narrative dimension of the...
Yes, and there's more professionals studying that now, that you have not only the stories of individuals who change their stories. You know, these are stories of fear, courage, of basically overcoming the problems we have in life. And those are so helpful to other people who are in the same boat. Because often they cannot talk with their family as well as someone else who truly understands. And I call it ultimate empathy. Ultimate empathy. In other words, it's the same as, you know, if you're, you know, out of country, no one else is speaking Greek, so you suddenly find someone who speaks, you know, your language. They know it because it's in their heart and they have experienced it. And there's almost an instant sense of connection between the people. So I'm a Vietnam vet, and so it's different when I'm in a room with other veterans. We've gone through our struggles, often coming home. And so some of these groups work so well in advocating for what's needed. Because when I came back from Vietnam, there was no psychiatric for basically the only way you could get into the counseling system was to, they had to call you a schizophrenic. They had eliminated battle fatigue, and yet I knew of friends who were having terrible dreams both day and night, and it was actually a Vietnam vets group that started the doctors to think about what became post-traumatic stress disorder. Because at that time, we were calling it post-Vietnam syndrome, but it was even with my wife, sometimes I'd struggle at night and she would have to wake me up because I'd be, you know, almost fighting with her. You learn so much about what resources are available, because when you get into the group, you pool all the experiences of other people to find out what doctors or clinicians, if you need that type of help, would be helpful. And if you don't have the services you need, so many of us, we had to fight in order to get the government to recognize. There was also issues like Agent Orange poisoning. I had supervised the spraying of our area to keep the weeds down in the perimeter so it wouldn't sneak up. You know, the people, the enemy, and but I inhaled some of that, and I had one good friend die as a result of that. He was doing the same. And I have some health problems that now the Veterans Administration recognizes as having been caused by Agent Orange. So, but we had to fight for that. So some of the groups you get into advocacy.
Yes, and it's a very important dimension of the groups. For some of the problems, advocacy is something that it's needed very much.
Right, and often the professionals are not aware of the problems and what it causes to families. So
I would like to ask you something else now, because as we have seen at the conference these days, there is a great diversity regarding the termination of the terms of self-help group, etc. Some Europeans use the term self-help group. I have seen a lot of Americans that are using the term self-help mutual help group. What is the term that you use after all these years?
Okay, we use basically self-help mutual aid, and we say both because yes, it is self-help, individual, but it is also mutual help, and that's another phrase, mutual help group. It does give the concept that it is people, one another, helping each other. I think, and through this conference, we've even heard some of the participants come up with their definitions in terms, and again, I think it's culturally appropriate, that it's their collective support, that it's not just one-to-one, because sometimes when you talk to one person who's been through it, it could be a completely different experience that they had. But when you get in a group, you find out what the normal is. So the groups, the other thing is they do not psychopathologize. You know, that you are not the victim of that illness, but you basically know that other people have been there, and you begin to recognize how it can be helpful to exchange ideas and support. As I said, ultimate empathy. Really, I think, brings souls together. So.
And how do you see the field of self-help groups and self-help support after 34 years?
I say it's still very rich, and the groups, we've studied the groups in New Jersey, and most of the groups are still growing in numbers. and some of them are going into prisons and spreading the word there. Some are going online and having an opportunity for people to interact via Skype. That they actually join the meeting as almost, it's not the same, but it gives them, if they are in a rural area, an area where there is no group, it gives them that connection. It's not, and often they want to try, they want to see the people face to face, because there's nothing like seeing someone else who's in the same boat and actually getting to meet them and hearing their story.
So in these 35 years, if you try to think of specific milestones of this positive development, can you refer us some milestones?
Well, milestones have been when professionals have recognized and been able to describe the dynamics of the benefits of the groups and to show how they are very real. You can't quantify hope, and it's difficult even sometimes for social support. But they've been asking, and now they've been doing better research, asking people nationally in the United States, do you have someone when you're facing a difficult life change that you can talk to about it? And now there's more recognition that people are finding the support that they need through the group. So they're being better recognized, and they just make it so much easier. You don't have to. I was telling the story of how when we had researchers who said, "Oh, you have to study these groups more. Give them an interview before the person is at that first group meeting, and then follow them." But when I suggest that to the groups, they said, "Oh, we don't ask people to fill out forms. It is so easy. They don't even have to give their last name if they come to the group. They just come, and it would be totally inappropriate to ask them to fill out forms like when they get into basically a health system. You're simply going there to learn more on how to help yourself and your loved ones, and it does that for so many people so often. And it's not really recognized for the force it is, especially in these days when you don't have extended family to talk to. Our memory is usually just of the one generation before us, and sometimes with smaller families and people moving around different parts of the country, they are not available like they used to be.
And how about clearinghouses?
Clearinghouses, I think that there should be a clearing. I wish that there was like a national department of self-help groups that was like a national with highways. It would be good to have it at different levels. And so we are strongly advocating, and in my articles that I write, I say any professional can help other people like a clearinghouse does by just, for instance, the most easiest thing that they can do is just ask their clients if they would be interested in joining a group, just to talk with others who've been there, and to see if it is for them. And if there is no group available, then a powerful question can be, would you be interested in joining with some other people who are in the same boat to start a group? And in many cases, a significant number, they're going to say yes. And so they can just be, you network them together with just a couple so that when they have their first group meeting, the people are sharing the responsibility. And so they just don't see one person, because often that's the professional model. You sit back and you wait for the social worker or the psychologist to tell you what is going to happen in this group. And sometimes they don't even ask for input from the individuals. They already want to teach a course and through a group. And but within the self-help group, if you go there, someone greets you at the door warmly and explains what the meeting's going to be like, and can also maybe link you with someone else right there who has been in a very similar situation. So you can start just finding out more about how the group operates, but especially how that family deals with is dealing with the problem.
So it is more, if I understand correctly, you suggest that the need is not the institution of self-help clearinghouse is an important one. But as you said to the conference, although self-help clearinghouses are going down, self-help groups are going up.
Right, and
because the diffusion of self-help groups was...
yes, and so we refer to that. I mean, I have always said there will be a saturation of it. And I think there's another term that we expressed here in terms of that you reach a ceiling, the number of groups, and but there's still room for new types of groups that break off, and some of those are based on a person's ethnic background, or for instance, for immigrants, they're doing groups and helping with it. So we are basically, we run a business where if we are successful, we will run ourselves out of business.
Yeah, and I find it very interesting and very, very hopeful.
Yes.
Very hopeful, because in my opinion, the aim is not for us to reproduce ourselves,
right,
but to help the self-help movement to grow.
Yes, and I think I'm very much in favor of free trade in self-help group ideas. In terms of, what happens, we have had many come from other countries, where someone has developed a new type of group and a new program maybe to help with that, or has just been able to inspire other people in other countries to start a similar group. And I have people who come to me and say, I just got this book, it's about a group in England for people who have had car accidents and others, and it's called basically About Face. And it's for those who have had facial, sometimes they've been injured badly and they're afraid to go out. And we helped basically one woman start a group that became national in the United States based on a book that was written in England about that group.
Yeah, that's very good. I would like to go now to some more specific things, if you can.
Sure.
But before that, is there all these years, is there one or more favorite models of self-help groups?
Certainly the 12-step groups.
It's a favorite for you.
It's a favorite for people. That's
for
the
you?
majority.
For you?
And I personally have, although I have, there's one group, Combat Veterans Anonymous, which is was started, and I helped when basically Dr. Matzat and I went to Dubrovnik in 1993. The UN had just taken over the area, and the people were very, basically they were struggling because they had been overrun. Children had hidden in wells with a grandparent, and there were also those involved in the conflict who were not only physically disabled, but also, again, were suffering with stress. And that was, that they actually started a group, some of the ex-soldiers.
So, about the specific things, I think that there are some dangers or limits in these experiences, and I would like your opinion. I believe that especially in the United States, but in our country, in Greece too, although we have not so extended self-help group network, there is a growing professionalization among members.
Yes.
What do you think of this?
And it was basically, I've seen with so many issues that come up, and I refer to it as the parade. And the parade. So basically you will see the self-help groups start, and then there will be the professional interest. And that is not readily there, but often the professionals see the parade. For instance, when they're organizing new groups for, as my generation, we're caring more for our elderly parents, as I was and others, so there were groups formed for that, because you'd be at work, but then there would be an emergency with your mother or father who was in their later years, and so we helped to start these groups, and the professionals began to see it, so they began to have conferences, but they said that they were going to, so they run to the front of the parade to lead it after it's already moving. And it was very interesting because we had, like for all the caregiver groups, we had our first conference, and it was actually it was the state that recognized the problem. And but there was and I talked about all the groups that had developed in New Jersey for adults whose parents were elderly, and and how they had. There were so many with. One was called basically the living room, because they met in one woman's living room, and they simply exchanged ideas and to help one another. And they actually began to call for advocacy in terms of needed respite services, because they were doing this. They didn't know when it was going to end, because the problems were growing deeper. They were spending more time. But then the next speaker was a professional who got up and said, "Oh, these people can't run these groups. They're too depressed." We see already the research that they are very depressed. So, I mean, whereas I see that research and I say, well, that's a good reason to have them join and share their strengths. The professional said, oh no, they need a professional to help run the group.
And apart from the role of the professionals in self-help groups, I have a growing fear, working close to 12-step members.
Yes.
In my experience, that some here in Greece, some old members of 12-step groups are taking the roles of counselors or paraprofessionals,
right,
which is not a bad thing in my opinion, but it becomes a very dangerous thing, a bad thing, when these guys are going in the self-help group and trying to find customers.
Right. No, and we've experienced that too. Yeah. And we have, I don't have the illustration, but we have a cartoon that reflects how some people, they begin to, it has there, always remember, it is a support group, not a support person. And and we have, and some of them in the United States, they sometimes call it, if it's the founder of the group, they can be very charismatic, but that, if they become the expert, they do not, if they don't realize that there's more wisdom in the group than in them, they can be very detrimental to the development of the group. And so the focus should be on even how a new member might have a little piece of the puzzle that they bring in terms of a good place to have a meeting or a particular resource that an article they read that can be very positive influence to other members. So it's that can be a problem. So
another thing that triggered my mind these days in the conference was that your experience and your view in all these things, in self-help support, etc., and in self-help groups, is that you're very close to the basic ideas of self-help groups, and you're not seeing these ideas as good tools, but you give emphasis on the philosophy of the groups more, if I understood correctly.
I'm open to suggestions. I think there is a lot of room for people to. I refer to myself as being one of the blind men who's touching the elephant, and feeling, and feeling the leg of an elephant. It's a tree. Well, I know I don't know about all the different designs, especially as people find new ways to interact in new techniques that they use to develop a program. So I think that, but there's a general philosophy that there's going to be, that these reflect the human spirit to overcome obstacles, and that can't be quantified easily by researchers. That much of it is common sense.
And I totally agree with you. I think that we should not lose this basic view, that it's about common sense, about simple things that you should put in practice and leave the group.
Yes, the group can base, yes, and that's why so many with the 12-step groups, they still there's so much autonomy to an individual group. There are, rules, but they can interpret them. So there's flexibility there. We are not buying into a dogma, of a religion. It's basically, it's the general philosophy, and it's that issue of, like I said, that's why I like the current research that's going on, where they're studying groups by the narratives that are expressed, and all the elements of hope and strength and sharing of good resources is identified and promoted.
And if a young social scientist would be interested in the field of self-help support, which would you say are the main characteristics or key features that a self-help supporter should have?
Should hear of?
Should have.
Oh, should have. I think.
How can we say that he's a good self-help supporter?
That's an interesting question. And what I look for is someone who has had some experience. And it doesn't have to be him. It may be that there was a family member who had an experience in the self-help group. And to try and understand that that the groups are focused on people sharing their strengths. It is when I take a young professional to a meeting, it is different. Often after the meeting, that professional will see people in terms of labels. Like they will tell me, oh, well, that person is a passive aggressive, it's like, or this person has this illness. But I look at it, I try to say, but didn't you see how he encouraged that, how he responded to the one woman who needed help? And so I think the professionals have to take off their dark-colored glasses that have them only see faults and focus on strengths. Someone who can also understand that many of these people in these groups are people who have actually started new types of social agencies. Sometimes a group will evolve. Many times a group will evolve into a national foundation for many of the physical and even for the mental health problems and the disorders. But it gives them that sense of self-esteem that because people are professional in terms of their collective, their experience,
of course.
Experiential knowledge is what we can call, or collective wisdom. They need to have a sense, an openness to see with new eyes, to recognize that there's the resources. So that's why I say, and many doctors and health professionals will go to open groups to learn more about, when I see new groups starting, if they just go to the group, or if they invite the group into their agency, just a couple of group representatives who will talk about what goes on at a meeting and take the mystery out of it, and explain how the groups were helpful to them. And we see through, your meeting has enabled people to share their materials, like the materials from Norway, where it's part of the public health system, that they include self-help. That is that is a milestone, okay? And when so that here, this becomes a self-help group for basically those studying this whole field that needs to be understood and promoted.
Another thing that I would like to ask you is that 15 years ago, when I started working in the field and I've started studying a lot about all these things, I have some other interests regarding addiction field, etc. But in a funny and a peculiar way, I found your name and I found other names in the addiction field, etc. But you were somewhat interconnected. And what I'm saying is that probably you are not a scientist of mainstream science.
Yes.
Okay. And I think that, and I would like your opinion, I think that some critical elements in a scientist should be there in order for him or her to follow such paths as self-help support, etc.
Mm-hmm. And yes, there are, again, we have, as a science, again, you want to measure and you want to basically evaluate and ultimately you want to credentialize. And this is happening like with we were talking, your conference has brought out the issue of peer support, where actually people are paid for sharing their experiential knowledge and trying to give people hope. And that brings up, it's very hard. There are special problems to measuring the outcomes in a group, because you have to record it in some way that is not evasive, and takes away from the group. So that has it has made it difficult. But there's more studies coming out. Like when there is one thing I want to try and get is how the examination of the narrative stories of not only the individuals in a group, but the group itself has a narrative story, and how that can be better understood and evaluated. But I think there's been so much research on the value of social support to better health and prevention of and delay in chronic illnesses for people, that we have to be able to make that point that these are helpful resources, even though not all of it can be proven scientifically.
Yes, and to prove something scientifically, you said at the beginning that you started in New Jersey 35 years ago, And you helped establishing more than 100,000.
Basically over 1,200 groups.
1,200.
200 new groups in New Jersey.
1,200. What is better proof?
I know.
Sometimes we the scientists lose the touch with the reality.
Right. And sometimes, again, with some of these problems, the professionals do not recognize. I mentioned Agent Orange, but there was also post-polio syndrome.
Yeah.
These people with polio were again experiencing setbacks, and the doctors initially responded by, saying it's all in your head.
Yeah.
But they began to study the data and find out that yes, there was the experience of the people is true. There is something happening here, and so I think with many of the other chronic illnesses like Parkinson's disease, the professional has a different. Like I was at one conference where there was a clinical trial for a new Parkinson drug, and one was a blind group.
Yeah.
They were all blind to whether they were getting the correct medication or just sugar, and the people just within the groups were able to tell that if you had to get up and basically urinate in the middle of the night, you must be on that. You must have gotten the real thing. And so it was interesting because I was at a national medical conference with physicians, and some physicians were saying, "Oh, this is terrible. Here they are able to figure out whether they're on the drug or not." Well, other doctors were saying, "Hey, this is amazing. These people are able basically to tell, to show us that they can actually get together and not only help one another, but also identify the intervention."
I would like to make two more questions, and I will stop. In looking over your career to date, what do you feel best about?
I feel best that that we have helped to spread the message that even though we are not members of every group, we have helped again to bring them to the forefront. Like I said at the conference, one of our values is we do not. A hospital would like to always put itself first, but no. In this case, we are last, and it's the people. You always put the people in the spotlight to tell their stories, because that is the strength of it. So I feel that we've abided by our values of the respect for the groups and spreading the message, and especially in just networking the people. Because what we also do is when somebody wants to start a group, we put their name on the computer database along with the existing groups. But it will say there is no group in this county, but so-and-so is interested in starting one. Would you be interested in joining with them? And by linking them together, just like as you're linking people with existing groups, you are also linking them with other people who, when they get together, as I said, there's like two pieces of wood. They start that fire of a group and can spread it. So that I'm especially proud of. And I hope that more professionals would be asking the same question. All it is asking questions to assess their interest. This is a miracle, really. No, that someone who is a taker of service, as a service recipient, can become a service provider. At times like these, with all the economic and different illnesses that we face, it's needed more than ever.
And the last one, but I think you've said some things. What are some of the most important lessons you have learned in your work to date that might be helpful to others working in this area? A lot of lessons.
Okay. To understand, basically to have a good understanding of self-help, and some of that comes from investing one's time. And as a professional, there's so much competition for the doctor's curriculum at colleges. And we've heard here, Jürgen Natzat and others talk to how they want to be very protective because there's all types of features. Pharmaceutical companies want doctors to learn one thing. We want to basically try to teach them about how they can prevent their burnout when they want to be all things to their patients and help them the most. There's going to be those situations. And my wife has educated me to that. She says she wants, with so many of these illnesses being debilitating illnesses, the doctor feels very poorly that because they can't cure that person. But we say, hey, but you can refer them to others so they can, deal with that life change and that chronic illness much better. And so these people, you have to realize that they can be a tool for you. So I think the best therapists are ones who will refer to the groups, recognizing that they themselves can't be all things to their clients. So that I think is a key point.
Yeah, of course. Would you like to add something that...
Oh, I want to thank you very much for basically bringing the people together, for your hospitality, and for and having it in one of the most beautiful places. And as I said in my presentation, it's great to basically, no better place than Greece for having the birthplace of democracy. Then you have these groups which are people learn about how to select, their leaders, and also how to get rid of them if they're not working properly in many of the groups. But also because of the long history of being the first centuries before other civilizations to actually have narrate epic stories, and that to become people can also get role models. And so no place but Greece do you carry that tradition on than in these self-help groups. Thank you very much for bringing us together, because we've been able to share so many different ideas as we try to learn more about this new endeavor of the human spirit.
And it was a great honor for us to have you here, because, as I've said to the conference, we were the first one that we came in touch 15 years ago for the establishment of self-help promotion program here in Greece, and we were very helpful. And
well, I'm glad that, and I just want to. I'm still learning from people like yourself. So thank you very much.